Let me talk a little bit about the new book, Pro-Market and Pro-Business, Essays on Laissez-Faire. I've done a whole bunch of books that many people would say, like, what does these even have to do with economics? I have this expansive definition of economics, so I see economics everywhere. But this book, it really is about economics in a much narrower sense, the kind of economics that you're taught in an intro class, the kind of topics that you deal with in that sort of class. And the book does start with this piece that I wrote called Pro-Market and Pro-Business. There is this weird thing that many people who are very pro-market, many libertarians, free market economists, will be very eager to say, look, I'm not pro-business. I don't actually like business or anything like that. And the first essay is like, well, why not? I mean, I can see why you wouldn't automatically like business just because you are pro-market, but still you would think that on average people that are pro-market would like business because, like I say, business does all this great stuff. So why wouldn't you appreciate it? Can you imagine someone who says, I love sports, but I don't particularly admire the athletes? They're like, well, isn't a lot of what you're doing as a fan enjoying the accomplishments of the athletes? So similarly, why is it someone who really likes markets wouldn't have a deep appreciation of business? And especially, why would you judge business harshly for doing things that everybody has to do to get by? So when people say, oh, well, business is dependent on government making roads for them, it's like, well, yeah, just like everybody. So even if you think we should privatize all the roads to go and particularly get on the case of business for being part of the system seems pretty odd. All right, so I see you got some questions now, so why don't we just start going there? All right, so let's see here. First question. Joseph Heinrich argues that the development of norms like prioritizing impersonal over interpersonal relationships was crucial for the development of markets in Europe. Do you think a norm of people being open to discuss salaries is important for a well-functioning labor market? How does this relate to your view on non-competes? All right, interesting question. I mean, I'd say we just start with the fact the United States probably has close to the strongest norm against discussing salaries in the world, and yet it's also by far the most successful economy with any substantial number of people, over 10 million. I think the U.S. is number one by almost every measure. So I would say it can't be more than a marginal effect. So maybe it would help a little bit, but I wouldn't think that it would be that big of a deal. Let's see. And how does this relate to your view on non-competes? Yeah, so the chapter on non-competes is where I point out there is this dynamic case for allowing non-competes, and it really comes down to this. Suppose you have a fantastic idea. You really need 10 workers to hire to implement it, but if you hire them, you're worried they're going to steal your idea. Non-compete agreement is just the kind of thing that would at least help put your mind at ease about employees stealing your ideas. So even though once the people are working there, it does reduce competition and innovation because maybe one of them will know a better way of applying your ideas, and if they could just grab it and run, that would be better in the short run. But in the long run, this is a way of unlocking ideas. One thing that I actually have noticed that's closely related is during COVID, finally I started seeing businesses advertising the exact dollar amounts they pay for different jobs. If you go to any Panda Express, they actually have a big infographic showing what the exact benefits are and salary for every level. So it is definitely a bit of a puzzle as to why that is not shown more prominently. There is this idea of, well, we don't want people who are there that working at Panda just for the money. We want people to have some deep-seated love of Panda before they work here, which sounds pretty hard to believe for most jobs. So, I mean, I am a little bit puzzled by that, I will admit. All right, let's see. Next question. Let's see here. So, if tax on capital income should be avoided, how can we prevent labor income to disguise as capital income? Yeah, so again, the main story here that most economists have is that it's bad to double tax income. And especially if you first earn labor and get taxed on the wages, and then you go and invest and get taxed on the interest, that's double taxation. Also, of course, corporations, normally there is anything that they pay to their shareholders, that gets taxed as the income of the shareholders, but there's also corporate tax on top. How can you prevent labor income from being disguised as capital income? Yeah, so I guess that would be something like, I am self-employed, but I call all of my income capital income. that actually would not generally suffer from double taxation. So, I mean, so I guess I would say like the normal story is precisely just avoid double taxation. When if you have the same rates on both labor and capital, then as long as it's not being double taxed, there's no reason to try to redefine one as the other. So yeah, I don't know that I have too much more to say on that. Let's see. All right, Jason Ford. Would you advocate the government have any role in paying healthcare costs? No, yeah. So in the book, I do have a chapter on separating health and state. This was my opening statement from a debate that I did with David Ballin way back in 2010, I think, when Obamacare had first been passed. I realize this is a super unpopular view, and if it's just, well, let's have government go and pay for the indigent, then it's not a huge deal. But yes, the basic issue with government role in medicine is strangle supply, subsidize demand, and then say, gee, why are prices so high? It is a really dysfunctional system. And the general point of medical care is very expensive, right? It's costly to produce, and yet we encourage people to go and get medical care regardless of the benefit. And we see the benefit for a lot of people small because a lot of people won't even get it, take advantage of it when it's free. So it is not a good idea of a system where you have very valuable resources and you push people who don't appreciate them to consume them anyway. So I'd say that is general view. And then last point is like, why not just make some mild exception? I think the slippery slope argument is really quite good. Slippery slope argument is good. And yes, a lot of government involvement in things like healthcare starts off with just some very minor concession, but it does expand. So we've learned this from experience. So I think it's best just to say no. Andreas. Given how far we are from libertarian society, given the fact that you describe yourself as a gradualist, what is the point of the debate between minarchism and anarchism? Assuringly, both destinations will follow the same path and adjustments self you made in experience. Before we arrive at a minarchic system, seems the disagreements between minarchists and anarchists is moot. I don't know that I ever describe myself as a gradualist. I think I'm not a maximal instantaneousist. So there are some kinds of changes where if you tried doing them in a day or an hour or a minute, it really would be disastrous. Those are the ones where I would say don't do it overnight. So, like, should you privatize the Soviet agricultural land right on the first day of harvest season? It's like, gee, like might be that we all starve to death before the crops get picked or something like that, right? And then similarly, for anarcho-capitalism, this is one where I'll definitely say, look, we pushed a button today to get rid of government provision of defense services. It would work out really poorly. It would just descend into chaos and civil war. So you might say that I'm a gradualist on anarchism, although that's a pretty mild form of gradualism. In terms of why I talk about it, I think like it really does help you to understand the basic ideas. So like, what exactly is it about police where it's so important for government to do it and government to have a monopoly? And that's where I think we do learn something valuable about how markets work. We learn something valuable about how far in principle should we go, and what are the actual factors that are preventing us that prevent markets from working. And so if you see my debate on anarcho-capitalism with Yaron Brook, I just start off with, all right, Yaron, like, do we have to have, under minarchy, does there have to be world government? Right? And he said, no, there doesn't have to be world government. So there can be multiple governments on Earth all applying free market principles, right? Right. Okay, great. All right. Could there be a whole lot of these governments? Could there be thousands? And he's like, yes. All right. And I say at that point, we already are very close, or we've approximated one version of anarcho-capitalism, which is anarcho-capitalism where there's a landowner who integrates a bunch of services with the land, and it's basically like homeowner associations. And then I go off from there. But anyway, so that's one where when you go through this thought experiment, you do get an idea of what could go wrong. And is it really the case, for example, as Ayn Rand said, that if there are two final authorities, they will automatically kill each other? And once you say you don't have to world government, it's like, no. Once just the fact that you've got two different competing suppliers doesn't mean they have to automatically kill each other, right? And in fact, we know that there are many country pairs in the world where that are right next to each other, where the odds of them fighting are near zero. So it's just not true that there's automatic violence as soon as there's two competing suppliers of defense. And then the next question, if you go and read it, is, all right, so once you accept that, why does it have to be geographical? Why couldn't it be organizational like insurance companies? So if the argument was just you're freaking people out by talking about this stuff, I'll say, look, yeah, don't freak people out, right? And I try not to. I don't think that I do on something like this. Instead, try to get them to see that the radical reform you're talking about isn't so different from something that they already are familiar with or would accept. All right, let's see here. Sissa, you once said that some parts of For New Liberty by Rothbard are crazy. Why? I've read the book and liked everything about it. Let's see. So, the crazy stuff. The stuff where he says that the Soviet Union has a passion for peace verging on the suicidal, I think was ridiculous. The part about the United States being the most imperialist country in the world. Let's see, I think during the entire 20th century. I think that one's pretty crazy. Let's see. What are going through other ones? So like his idea that road privatization would work well given the technology of the 1970s, also pretty hard to believe. That's not as crazy, but that one I would think is at least kind of crazy. Let's see. The part where, maybe the craziest part of all is where he says, look, we don't need to worry about going over to anarcho-capitalism in the middle of the Cold War because the Soviets would be totally deterred by guerrilla warfare. And it's like, yeah, like that doesn't make me feel any better. Like once you're at the level of guerrilla warfare, your society is in a state of near collapse already. And he has some bizarre things about how guerrilla warfare is potentially totally libertarian. It's like, yeah, but actually never is. I mean, how do you think guerrilla warfare works? There's some guerrillas that show up in a village and say, oh, hello, we're guerrillas. We would never dream of trying to intimidate anyone or use any force against anyone, but we would also appreciate some food and other supplies, and also, there anyone want to join us, possibly? It's low pay and risking death, but it's for freedom. That's not how actual guerrillas work. Actually, guerrillas show up with the guns, and at minimum, there's a thinly veiled threat that if you don't go and give us everything that we want, then we will start killing people. And of course, if you don't want to join their guerrilla band, they usually don't take no for an answer. So anyway, the idea that this is a good solution to anything, or that there's any reason to be even slightly optimistic about guerrilla warfare, I think is just totally crazy. So those would be the top ones. Let's see. Zaret. Regarding government's funding of science, does Zipf's law apply to researchers' productivity, or do we really need millions of scientists? Yeah, that's a great question. So the famous macroeconomist Charles Jones has a big paper on this, where he shows that we seem to be getting a lot less bang per buck out of R&D expenditures, science expenditures, total number. And then there's basically two stories. So one is we have picked all the low-hanging fruit, and so now to keep getting any further progress, we've really got to keep throwing more and more research effort at the same problems to keep progress constant, which is roughly what we've done. So that's a story. But yeah, your story is, Zipf's law is that vast majority of so-called researchers really aren't original or creative and barely do anything worthwhile. And the reason why progress is not much better, despite having a lot more researchers, there's researchers and researchers. So the real researchers who are actually innovators. And then there are all of the fake ones who basically just have the same credentials and superficially on paper look the same, but they don't really do anything. I think there's probably a bit to the low-hanging fruit story, but yeah, I think I liked your story better overall. If you just take a look at typical professor, what are the odds that, or research professor, what are the odds that they'll ever contribute anything that anybody's interested in? And again, there's the idea, well, we don't know who these people are. I said, we actually do know who these people are generally. There's a really high correlation between being in prestigious places and accomplishing much of anything. So yeah, I think that we would lose very little if we just accepted that 90% of professors aren't researchers at all, and all they do is teach classes and give them a big load and say, yeah, you weren't going to do much anyway, and reallocate whatever resources there are to people at the top. I think there's a lot of dysfunction there too. There's a recent piece by Max Tabarrok just going over how old the people that get grants are and how this has increased a lot over time. So it's not just that only old people are good enough, but rather that the system is just ossified. So I think there's a lot to that too. All right. Regarding Panda Express Pay. Bucky's. Yes, they post pay benefits too. Yeah, I know. I just did a Buc-ee's and they totally do it. And I think they have even more detailed information on the pay. So it does happen. I mean, you figure this is a good way to attract workers. Just let people know what they're in for. You might say, well, if you offer bad pay, then you don't want to tell people. It's like, well, but it's like the usual story of unraveling, where the people paying the best, they want people to know. And then if you're second best, well, if you don't report, you're going to look like you're average. So if you're second best, you still want to report. So you think the whole thing would unravel. Like the only story that I can really think of is business think there's some kind of adverse selection of people who are that focused on money. And you want to at least have people who are willing to go and pretend that they are fascinated by running a Buc-ee's. Although, like, it doesn't sound that plausible to me, but I don't have anything better. Let's see. Do you think private charity is efficient? It seems more efficient than government welfare programs, so that might be a low bar. Like private business, charities don't face the same incentive to spend money efficiently. Yeah, I mean, like, so the whole idea of the effective altruism movement is it begins by quietly insulting all existing charity by saying, yeah, you guys aren't really very effective, and we're going to try to actually measure things and look at results. I'll say overall, my view of the entire nonprofit sector, private and public, is that it's all similarly dysfunctional. The private sector, at least, there is the hard budget constraint. If you run out of money, then you go out of business. So somebody's got to like what you're doing. But that's about it. Um, the possibility of charity doing great good is clearly there. And you can see that with things like GiveWell's charity ratings, and where effective altruists do really rate quite how good a charity is and what they're accomplishing. But that said, I think most charities really aren't very good. And corporate charity was notable. Like here, I have some firsthand experience with people involved with corporate charity, where they spend more money on publicizing the corporate charity than the charity itself. It really, it's obviously for PR, and so they're really like what they're looking to be effective in is just getting people to like them rather than accomplishing anything good. This is one where I just blame the humans. If you donate to Harvard without seeing whether Harvard's doing anything good or bad, well, then Harvard's going to have a pile of money to do whatever it wants with. Let's see. If charity is efficient, how should we care for the destitute in society? Charity can be efficient. So, like, if we would actually have norms of effective altruism and say we're going to give money to those kinds of things, then I think charity does great. But in terms of caring for the destitute, I mean, obviously there's the usual ones of help from friends and family, but if you say really destitute, you don't have that. So yeah, I do think that it's likely that if there was a big cutback in the welfare state, that there would be a lot more money for the domestic poor. And I think that that raising money for the destitute is one of the easier ones. But I mean, just to be brutally honest, it's not like the fact that, say, the welfare state in Haiti doesn't work very well means that Americans donate a pile of money to Haiti to make sure that they don't go hungry. It's just that the system just doesn't work that well. As to whether there's any really good alternative, don't think so. So, the main thing I advise is, like, don't become destitute. And then, like, if there is charity, so if there is charity, then better. But probably the main thing, of course, that could really be done to help the truly poor would be open borders, as I've said many times. Some people say, "Well, how could we go and solve their horrible poverty? How about you just stop preventing them from getting a job?" Right? Obviously unpopular, but I would focus on that. Let's see. Is improvement in state capacity necessary for a developing country to become a developed country? Yeah, great question, right? State capacity, one of the strangest theories of societal success that's popped up in recent years. When it comes down to, well, successful societies have effective government, so that's the key. And you really, really will hear state capacity people saying, look, that is the crucial ingredient. It's like, well, what makes you so confident that that's the crucial ingredient? Because having effective states correlates highly with having effective economies, effective norms, all kinds of other things. Now, I've suggested, well, what if we just say the secret to success is social capacity? It's like, well, then we just need to focus on improving society. It's like, well, that's pretty lame. It doesn't really seem responsive to anything. And I'll say, well, like, there is something that is falsifiable about the view that social capacity is crucial, which is social capacity says all good things will correlate, and they do. State capacity is basically just going and trying to somehow reconcile the hardcore status of saying we need to have a really strong government to have the world work with appreciating markets. And what the state capacity people will want to say is, well, like a strong government is also can be a lean government. Just it's like, yeah, you're basically just defining whatever works as being state capacity. So I think it's a pretty, not pretty. It's a grossly overweighted story. Uh, so and then, and on top of this, there's this other weird conceptual confusion that I think I do mention in this book, which is like, if you see a government doing poorly, why assume that it has low capacity? Maybe it just has bad priorities. I think the best example of this was during COVID, where we got to see that even governments in India, you might think, oh, they're not really well organized. They actually shut their countries down. Right? Even some very seemingly weak governments effectively shut their countries down. They were able to organize that. So if they can organize that, why can't they go and pave the roads or whatever? And I'll say the answer, it's not lack of capacity, it's bad priorities. Right? They will make a priority of this, if it's to save one life, if it saves one life nonsense, but they don't make a priority of making the roads work. And so they are good at one thing and bad at the other thing. So I say state capacity is actually really high. The main issue is state priorities, and much better than trying to get state capacity up is to improve state priorities so that they stop trying to build a lot of monuments and puff up their national pride, and instead said, what can we do to make our countries rich? And it's like, yeah, all right, well, open up to the international economy, deregulate. And if you want to call that state capacity, great, but it's a pretty weird use of the term. All right. Rothbard, you have no positive moral duty towards your children. So you can leave them in the yard to starve without violating any real moral obligation. To be fair, I think Rothbard would say you don't have any legally enforceable obligation. I think he probably would have been on board with you have some moral obligation, but he didn't. He was very clear. I'm drawing a distinction between these two things. There's what you may rightfully exercise violence to prevent, and there is other stuff which may very well really important, but it's nothing that not something that you're allowed to use violence to prevent. If you go and read what he said about it, he did have this bizarre caveat where you can't hide the baby in a closet and let him starve. So you have to put him into a public place. And then it's like, all right, so there's one positive duty, which is to publicize the infant's existence. But other than that, you can't make people do anything. It's like, well, what if you live 1,000 miles from anyone? Are you morally obliged to go and travel 1,000 miles, or you can just send a letter to their newspaper? Anyway, this is one where it's one of many examples where Rothbard is takes this non-aggression principle and just says it's just always, always, always. And I think that Mike Humer's version of saying no, there's a non-aggression presumption, not a non-aggression axiom. It's not that you can never ever initiate aggression, but only under special circumstances. And I say definitely if you've got if you are the parent of a child and you don't feel like taking care of him, it's like, well, then you're going to have to figure out something else. You're going to have to go and figure out how he's you put him up for adoption or something like that. You're going to have to find some other alternative. You can't just go and let him starve to death. It's like, well, but by libertarian principle, I never signed a contract saying that I would do so. It's like, yep, all right, well, so in that case, we should bend the libertarian principle in this case, right? Even if it's only to the extent of putting the baby on the church steps, which Rothbard actually seemed to make some concession to that, but logically, once you say you don't have any that it'd be wrong to make people feed a baby, and it's like wrong to require that he gets one free taxi ride to a church or one free op-ed or not op-ed, one free ad in the local newspaper or whatever. So right, so I think he's being pretty crazy on that. By the way, if you go and read that essay in Not for No Liberty in Ethics of Liberty, he actually cites Hillary Rodham, right, before she married Bill Clinton. So, and he approvingly cites her if you go and read the footnotes to the article. So, fun fact. All right. Let's see. What is your opinion of Walter Block's defending the undefendable? I actually wrote a whole essay on it for the Festschrift for Walter Block. I say that the general idea of the book of there are a lot of people in markets that are widely hated but are actually doing good things is true. But then he also throws in some really crummy examples uh, where, and again, like if you read the book, he says, look, the people in my book are they're not saints, but they are heroes. So he has like the drug addict as a hero. And it's like what exactly is heroic about him? He's like, well, he's going and defying an unjust law. And it's like, well, but if is that enough to be a hero? Like, what if it's an unjust law, but it's an unjust law that prevents you from doing something that is really bad? Like, if there's a law against being a total jerk to other people, would it make you a hero if you started being a jerk to everybody? So I think that's a very strange uh, claim, and I think he's probably like in modern language to like would Walter be trolling? It's more of like an Aspie thing if I'm not going to go and use words with their usual connotations anyway. But like it is a fun book and it definitely has some good parts in it. I'm trying to remember. So part of the deal that I have with the Festschrift is that I'm allowed to go and publish the essay that I wrote on my Substack. I don't think I've done it yet, so I think I was waiting for the actual publication in the book before I would share it, and then I would also try to get other people to buy the whole book. But Walter Block's gotten mad at me a couple times, but he's always forgiven me, and like he's a lovable guy. You can't stay mad at Walter. I totally agree with Rothbard. America being the most imperialist country of the 20th century. The amount of times the U.S. invaded or interfered with foreign countries are countless. Why do you disagree? Well, let's see. What would be the best measure of imperialism? Would it be just total number of countries who ever done anything in? I don't think that's a very good definition. How about like the number of people in other countries that you've killed in wars of conquest? Yeah, I think that's a lot better. And by that standard, Japan crushes the United States in the 20th century. Germany crushes the United States in the 20th century. And Soviet Union. Yeah, so let's see. That one's a little bit more complicated just because of how do you count the Soviet invasion of Eastern Europe. And it's like, well, if they had gone in there, beaten Hitler, and then marched back, then it doesn't seem like that would be a reasonable example of a war conquest. But since they stayed, then after the fact, we discover it was a war conquest, so you should count that too. So yeah, so number of times you've done anything in a country is a terrible measure of imperialism. It should be something about number, countries that you have invaded with the intent of actually taking them over, and combined with some body count, or at least some total number of people. So, yeah, I would say that's a bad measure. All right. If you're taking a notion test, what's your score on agreeability? Yes, I have done it, and I think I come out, overall. Let's see. I did it. I think I actually did it before I became a parent, so I have been curious as to whether my answers to anything change. I'll say that I'm definitely, as a parent, I became more tolerant of people that have are just like not just my own kids, of course, but like definitely that's something where I just like kids a lot more after becoming a parent. So I think you will get a good. I think that will boost your score on agreeableness if you just say you like children and things like that. Which I don't know what I would have answered before I had kids. I never disliked children. But anyway, I think I'd probably come out at something like 20th percentile of agreeability. So as you may know, agreeability basically overlaps with Myers-Briggs thinking feeling. And there are questions about being logical versus being emotional on the five-factor test, but then they get combined with things like, do you feel sorry for small animals or things like that. So I'm really high on any measure of just pure logic versus emotion. But then for the other stuff, I'm going to at least not be not going to be like very maximum level on the other things. Of course, agreeableness is reverse coded. So low agreeableness equals thinking, high agreeableness equals feeling. Let's see. What's your view as the leading cause and remedy to corporatism? So let's see. Corporatism, if it's just the businesses being in bed with the government, I say, yeah, well, if the government didn't have favors to hand out, that would be the end of corporatism. I would say that, especially writing my book on construction, gave me a new appreciation of the great social benefits of business lobbying, because when you think about it, pretty much the only people in society that are pushing to go and allow new construction are developers. So if they kept their, if they scrupulously stayed out of politics and said it's not my role to go and try to influence the government, basically we'd have no housing that get built anymore. So it's worth pointing out a lot of what businesses do when they try to influence the government is to get government to not be completely unreasonable and to allow them to do their jobs. So I would say that if you call that corporatism, then wouldn't even say that corporatism is bad relative to the alternative businesses scrupulously staying out of politics. But of course, there's plenty of actual bad things that businesses get government to do. I mean, interestingly, like even on the case of international trade, which is something where a lot of people think of as driven by special interests, we've seen it seems like the main reason why Trump is backing away is just the stock market crash. So, and you might think of that as, in a sense, corporatism, especially if there's billionaires calling Trump up and saying, "Come on, man, you can't do this. Don't please, oh great one, don't." So, you know, businesses going and lobbying government to go and put their competitors out of business bad, or lobbying for subsidies bad, but just lobbying to be able to do their job, right? And then there's even things in the middle. It's like, so if Walmart pays a pile of property taxes and they say, "Hey, we want you to go and connect us to the road," it's like, should you condemn Walmart for saying I want to get something for all the property taxes I'm paying? Seems unfair to Walmart to just condemn them for that. Let's see here. Let's see. Thanks. All right. So, what is your outlook for India? How many years do you think it will become a developed country? Obviously, it's a continuum. How long for India to get to the current level of Mexico is, I think, a pretty reasonable one. And let's see. So current growth is usually about 6%. We should expect that to taper off a bit. So let's see. I'll take out my calculator from 11th grade, and so if they figure they can maintain like 5% for 20 years. So let's see. Even 5% at 20 years would be it's getting them maybe close to Mexico. So say like I think 25 years to get to the current level of Mexico is pretty reasonable. So that will be, and then so that'll be my answer. To get to the level of the United States, or get the current level of the United States, that I think would be more like 50 years. Because there's this thing in macroeconomics called catch-up growth, where it's easier to get high growth if you are really behind, because then you can just borrow all the successful ideas that are already around. But the richer you are, the more you have to start innovating and coming up with something new, which is much harder. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And so for India to catch up where the U.S. is, yes, 50 years. For India to actually overtake the U.S., I won't say never, because forever is a long time. Like World War III happens and the U.S. is really affected and India is not, then India could overtake the U.S. under those conditions. I think a lot of people will say India's got a low IQ problem. I think a lot of their low IQ, at least, is just caused by deprivation. If you've seen the pieces that I've written on Bet on it, on international adoption and what this shows us about how much of international IQ gaps are environmental, see at minimum 40%, probably quite a bit more. So my view is probably low IQ is not a long-run problem, and that is actually one of the things that we should be optimistic about, is that as they get richer, deprivation will go down, and the whole country is going to get smarter, which will have further benefits. Okay. Let's see. In the essay, so about more bang for buck, so money is little effect on happiness. But as far as that's empirically wrong, do you have data that says different? So I'm wondering, if you're thinking about like the Justin Wolfer stuff on money having little effect on happiness, if you look at his scale, it's logarithmic. And if you look at what the slope, what Justin finds, though, if you log it, it looks like you're getting some substantial gain. But if you remember it's logged, and you look at the actual magnitude of the coefficient, what his results are totally consistent with, in plain English, saying it barely matters. What are we talking about? It's something like to raise your income from like 7 to 8 on a 0 to 10 scale, you need to get your income to go from like $100,000 to $1 million a year. All right, so it's like 10 times your income to go up one step on the scale. So to me, I'd say that is basically a rounding error, right? And in terms of what can I do to get happier, if that's the way the world works, saying, "Oh, we'll just find a job that earns $1 million a year," it's like, that's a pipe dream. Like, I'm not going to be able to do that. But on the other hand, that's just one step. So then, what really works? So what really works for happiness is spending a lot of time with people whose company you enjoy. Much better than getting a lot of money is just to find true love, which money helps, but not that much. Let's see. Have you ever debated someone solely on the labor theory of value versus subjective theory of value? As many still support labor theory of value. I've never done that. That sounds totally futile. You'd have to pay me a lot of money to do it. It's just like, why don't I just bang my head against a wall? If there's like, all right, so walking around, find a diamond. It's worth $1 million. So, and, there is the Marxist response of, right, socially necessary labor time. So, all right. Okay, so what about something where it requires almost no time? It's just land. So, like, what if there's some land that's packed with diamonds, but the amount of time required to pick up the diamonds is like $1 million diamond per second? All right, so in that case, why would that not be a valid counterexample? Right, and then there's obviously examples of things like unique goods where this doesn't work. There's what about like Picasso's art after Picasso dies? There's no cost at which it can be produced, so you might say the cost of the labor is infinite, and yet it obviously goes at a finite price. So yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff where I just say people believe in this are total crackpots. They're hopeless. I often think about the scene at the end of Star Wars Episode 6, Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan says, Anakin, the Emperor is evil. Or the Chancellor, I guess the Chancellor is evil. And then Anakin says, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And then Obi-Wan says, well, then you are lost. And yeah, someone who believes in the labor theory of value, they're lost. No one can help them except themselves. They just have to look in the mirror, admit that they just don't know anything, and then repent. And they're not likely to do it, but that's all we got. All right. Any lessons suggested for econ undergrads? I mean, first of all, like, stay the course. Econ is the highest paid of all the easy majors. So unless you definitely know you want to do CS or mechanical engineering or something like that, then econ is a great choice. In terms of suggestions, if you just want to go and learn more, then I would start by going to the faculty page for your econ department and just go down the whole list. And if there's anyone where you think there's a 5% chance that you could go and learn something from them, go and introduce yourself to them in office hours and show up with some questions. So look into their work. Look at what they've done with their lives. There's a 5% chance that you think that having a conversation with them would be helpful to you. Do it. And don't show up and saying, hi, I like economics, teach me something. They're not going to like that. But if you show up and you demonstrate that you have read multiple pieces of theirs and you have thoughtful questions, this is possibly the best day in all year for that economist. Because most people toil in total obscurity. Nobody cares at all about what they're doing. Their students are apathetic. And then if you show up, I'm not even a student in your class, but I've been reading your articles, I'm curious, and then you have some questions. That's going to put you on their radar. And who's to say? They might, maybe you do independent study under them. Maybe they'll take you to lunch and you can ask them even more questions. Maybe you could be a research assistant. Maybe they'll recommend you for a job. And obviously, don't do this like a day before you want a job recommendation. Do it now. Get started on this now. Start meeting economists at your school in person, and then any economist whose work you like, email them questions. Get on their radar. It's a good experience. You'll learn from them. And also, then these become valuable social connections for you. So totally do that. Let's see. If you want to get an econ PhD, then these days it's really important to double major math. Sorry, I'm only a messenger. All right. And then, like anything else, apply the ideas. Like, try to apply the ideas, work them into normal conversation. It's not just something for the classroom. It's something to guide your way through life, to organize your thinking. Right. And in my previous book, Self-Help is Like a Vaccine, there's a lot of great self-help in economics. Like, just valuing your time at your wage and thinking about using that to decide whether you should use a toll road, that kind of thing. It is a great way to just go and live better. Tell us about your t-shirt. Oh, okay. Let's see. This one is just from Granada, España. And I was there back in 2019. Fantastic place. Spain is a fantastic country for tourism. And even now, I've been there 4 times maybe. I've only scratched the surface, really. So, fantastic country. Go there. And actually, if you're from Latin America, I think you usually have visa-free travel. So, whereas if you are from Latin America, you don't have visa-free travel to the U.S., but for Spain, you do. So, great opportunity. Your book, Self-Help is Like a Vaccine, got the premise wrong. The personality remains more or less stable, then no amount of self-help would work. For self to be like vaccine, you would need a neurological agent to change your personality. Would you disagree? Self is more like taking stream. Okay. Yeah. Say so. Measured personality definitely changes. There's a whole area of personality psychology. For example, the following are true: as people age, their openness goes down, conscientiousness goes up, extroversion goes up, agreeableness goes up, and neuroticism goes down. Right. So personality does change over time. Um, I would say that like if you say, all right, well, that's just sort of like the test isn't like true personality. True personality never changes. I would say, well, I think it seems like it's like people have changed their personalities. It's not something that changes quickly. I mean, I would think about it as personality is something where it's a long run set of attitudes, but then remember what Aristotle said about this. He said, look, the way that you go and build virtue, build character is you start with you as you really exist, and you do something that would be done by the version of yourself you want to be. And you just do it. You choose the right, as the Mormons say. And if you keep choosing it, you start building up new habits, and then you gradually change. If you currently are just super anxious, are you ever likely to be super relaxed? Yeah, probably not. Or if you're super lazy, are you ever likely to be the world's hardest worker? No. But nevertheless, by acting in the manner that the person you want to become would act, you move in that direction. At first, it's just that you're changing your actions, but your attitudes generally do start to change in the same direction too. And so, like, part of self-help is just starting with what you got and then trying to make specific changes in a better direction until you internalize them as habits, and that really is doable. So yeah, definitely would not go and tell people it's not hope. So to say that it's hopeless is not only unhelpful, but it's just not true. All right. I'm a black South African of the Xhosa tribe. Most of us here sympathize with communist ideas. How do I convince my people to be libertarians? Wow, that is tough. But so again, step one of persuasion is just to have people like you. Always worth pointing that out. Right. So this is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you just say, hey, I noticed that you're a communist, you have terrible political views, let me change your mind. That's super ineffective. If they get to know you, they think that you're a decent person, you socialize with them, you do activities with them, and then you just let it know like I have some different views. That's where it's most likely to actually matter. Once they think that you are a good person, they're much more likely to listen to you and have a respectful conversation. There's the saying, it doesn't matter what you know. So it doesn't. Let's see. Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. That's a reasonable starting point. Then, in terms of what's the most persuasive way to address people that are ready to listen to you, there I would like to always try to start with something that's in their first-hand experience. Like, you know how it's super hard to get a job in South Africa, right? Says, well, that probably has a lot to do with labor market regulation, minimum wage, and so on. And people say, no, it can't. It's like, look, put yourself in the shoes of an employer. Like, would you want to go and hire us at this really high wage? Like, what skills do we even have? Right? And then say, look, and the way you get skills generally is by on-the-job training. So it'd be a lot better if we didn't have the minimum wage, if employers could easily hire unskilled workers without worrying about losing money, and then we could start working our way up. So I would start with things like that. If you've got any notable price controls, say for grain or whatever, and you say, yeah, I know how the store runs out. Well, it runs out of some things, but not others. Why do you think that is? Again, price controls. Honestly, I would also like if you're living in a very poor area, start with, well, is there anybody that we know who once was poor and they stopped being poor? Right, and it's very likely you'll know some people like that. These people who have been very successful by the standards of the community, and then it's like, so how are they different from other people? And like, is it really just they got lucky? It's like, or is it that they are hard workers, disciplined, or so that they have foresighted, planned, right? And I think like when you start to talk about people you personally know, it's really hard just to say success is just luck, or it's just the society's so unfair no one can succeed. Like, look, we know some people have succeeded, so why don't we go and look at what they did that was unusual and then try to emulate them? In the United States, I read a lot of books about black poverty, and yet it's totally normal in any black family in America for there to be a couple relatives who have made it. They've left black ghetto areas. They live in middle class areas. They have middle class incomes. They still show up at family events. And then the question is, how are those people in our family different from the rest of us? And yeah, it comes down to old fashioned bourgeois virtue. And like, these are the people that finished school, got full time jobs, didn't have kids until they were married. This is the recipe for success. And the idea that communism is going to somehow solve it seems totally fanciful. Like, the best way to solve it is getting our acts together. All right. Let's see. What are the essential conditions for economic transformation of developing countries achieved by South Korea and Taiwan? Yeah. Okay, of course, it's not just South Korea and Taiwan. There's a whole bunch of countries. All countries started off dirt poor, and a whole bunch of them are rich now. What is the secret? So I'll say that economic freedom is a crucial, I will say, like, economic freedom is the crucial ingredient. Not to be maximally successful, but to get from poverty to a big improvement. There were a couple of papers by Jeff Sachs in the 90s where he basically made a list of 6 idiotic policies that governments can pursue. And these are policies like hyperinflation, autarky, trying to keep foreign products out of your country. Full government takeover of industry, things like that. And the punchline of the piece was that out of countries that had avoided just all 6 of these absolutely boneheaded policies, 100% of all countries that had done that had had good growth. So I think that's pretty compelling. So, like I say, a necessary and sufficient condition for getting, sufficient condition is definitely economic freedom. And then, like, is it absolutely necessary? Even in countries that people just say, oh, well, they're just oil rich. I say, like, even the oil rich countries actually have generally pretty free economies. So Emirates or Qatar, the government is very involved in the oil business, but the rest of the economy, is basically multinationals and other businesses that are selling people products. So even there, I would say that economic freedom, it really is crucial. Having good natural resources, even having tons of oil, is totally not necessary or sufficient. So look at Venezuela. I know there is a view that high IQ is crucial. I think that IQ is helpful, right? But first of all, a lot of the IQ deficit of the third world, like I said, is reverse causation. They are mentally stunted because their kids are growing up in horrible poverty. Same with physical stunting. But higher IQ is better. So I think that is part of the East Asian success story, especially for mainland China, where they did move very much in the direction of free markets, but they were so communist to start that even now they're not that free market. And I'll say that probably having that very high intelligence in China combined also with great work ethic of China, that compensates for a lot of the other issues that they have. So even there, so like the Sachs rule of just avoid the 6 idiotic policies, just don't be like a totally autarkic, totally socialist country, and don't go and just try to get rich by printing money, and things will work out for you. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's see. Thought about AI and what it means for your thesis in the case against education. Yes, I was invited to go and speak about AI, or to write a piece on AI for the Chronicle of Higher Education. And I think a lot of what's going on is AI is revealing what a fraud higher education has long been. Right? People are not really going there to learn whatever skills that people pretend they're doing. That's not the main thing going on anyway. The main thing they're looking for is a stamp on the forehead. And if they can just go and cheat their way with AI, then that's what a lot of people want to do. They're not curious. And furthermore, of course, it's not like when they finish their job, there's going to be something really important they need to know that they don't know. Right? So, because you can keep using AI afterwards. So I think what AI really is doing is just exposing the hollowness of the system. It's long been a system of people who write stuff that nobody wants to read, and then they get stamped and certified on that basis. But now it's like we don't even need to have anybody read it, right? So someone who doesn't want to write something, giving it to someone who doesn't want to read it. That's the main thing that's been going on in universities for a long time. But AI is making it especially clear. It's like, what are we going to do? Have the students go and tell AI to write essays, and the professor has AI grade the essays, and then we just pretend like that was something? It's pretty ridiculous. Uh, Now, I do not think that it is going to crash the system down because it's got a pile of government and philanthropic money. And on top of it, as I say in the book, a lot of what you're signaling, it's not even just intelligence and work ethic, it's just sheer conformity. I am an obedient worker drone. And so, if in our society it remains the normal thing for upwardly mobile people to do, then we're going to keep doing it and keep burning tons of resources, most of which, again, is not actually really being paid for by the student themselves. But even if it was, look, you don't want to be the first person like in your social class that doesn't go to college unless you got some really good idea, and most people don't have any really good idea. My friend Isaac Morehouse has the startup dedicated to helping people find good careers without college. It's a great idea. He's a lot of successful customers, but the market share is tiny. And if you listen to him, I think you can understand why, because he's always telling you, you got to be really entrepreneurial. You got to reach out. You got to be your own best promoter. It's like, yeah, most people will never be that. So it's only for a certain special kind of person. Is congestion pricing enough to solve the problem of transportation in a country with limited government? Or, is the, or the government need to invest in subway system? Yeah, I'd say like congestion pricing, if you had that, you don't need anything else. Yeah, most of the time, public transportation is just a total boondoggle, and it'd be much better to just have people driving their own cars. It's even clearer once it's driverless cars. Main thing to understand about why do people prefer cars? They're faster, and they're faster in virtually every country. Because with public transportation, first you have to get to the public transportation, you have to wait, then you have to get off, then you have to walk to your final destination. Ed Glazer has a great piece on this where he just goes over time use and transportation. In the United States, virtually the only time you save money by using public transportation is when government has screwed up the road system with lack of congestion pricing. Even in Europe, where people in America, they have this great system of trains, even there, it is very unusual that cars are not faster than public transportation. And if you want to go anywhere off the beaten path, cars are a lot faster. Don't believe me? Just go to Google Maps and start putting in different routes. That's what I do when I'm deciding how I'm going to travel around Europe. I did a big trip starting in Frankfurt, and I did a big circle going to Prague, Warsaw, Berlin, and then back. Right, and what happened there is I had a car for the first week so that I could do some off the beaten path stuff. And other than that, we were doing the trains. But the only train route that was faster than driving in that entire trip was the train from Cologne to Frankfurt, because there was kind of high speed rail there. The only country I've ever seen where mass transit actually really is faster than cars is Japan. So, but again, like that doesn't mean that it was a good idea. Like super expensive to run that system. Fun for tourists. I use it when I'm there. But as to whether it was really a good idea, it's not enough just to say, oh, it's lovely and shiny. You've got to look at the numbers. So that's not the kind of thing people like doing. Do governments need to invest in subways? Like, no. Like there were private, the original subways in the United States were generally private. I mean, I think that under modern conditions, there probably just wouldn't be subways, except insofar as government privatized existing subways. That I think would be better. There'd be better congestion pricing, better maintenance. Again, like people say, like it'd be a monopoly. It's like, well, better to have a monopoly that works than one run by the government where they're chronically underpricing and leading to high congestion and then letting the system crumble, which is much more of what we're used to. All right. How do we deal with corruption being a path to success? If you can just change the system so government doesn't have much to hand out, that's the whole source of corruption. If government has a lot of stuff to hand out, then things are corrupt. Given that you've got a bunch of stupid rules, corruption has some obvious advantages. Like, without corruption, could you build anything in New York? It's not clear that you could. It's like, well, what's corruption? Is it corruption to spend years whining and dining everybody on the city council, taking them to fancy restaurants? And say, and then when you apply, say, well, I've got this new idea. I really want to go and make New York better. What do you think about this guy that I've spent $100,000 on your meals? Better that happens than that they actually just say no to everybody, which is the default. So when government has a lot less to do, has a lot less to hand out, then it's not as bad. Although I also say there's another highly effective way of dealing with corruption, which is super harsh punishments for corruption. So my friend Bob Lawson is intimately familiar with the country of Georgia, and he had a friend who was in charge of corruption. And what did he do? Well, first day he got any power, he went and handed out like a 20-year sentence to some traffic cop who took like a $10 bribe. And then he didn't just do it once. He kept going and just crushing people caught for corruption. And Georgia's ranking on corruption skyrocketed in just a couple of years. So harsh punishments really do work. People don't like doing them. May seem unfair. It's like, well, that poor guy was doing something that everybody else did. It's like, well, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get rid of corruption with draconian punishment. Totally does work. So that's the other thing. I was going to say, if you don't think it's unfair, it's a different question from, but would it work? Yeah, draconian punishment works. What are your thoughts on the difference between free trade and capitalism? Say, free trade is one feature of capitalism. Normally, free trade means that there's no restrictions on international commerce, particularly international commerce in goods and services. So capitalism would have that, plus, of course, free markets and everything else too. All right. I'm drawing from the point made by Spanish professor Miguel Angso Bastos. All right. El Gallego. And claims by others as Antonio Escojotado, History on Trade. So, okay, so that was not another question, but I met Bastos last summer. Seemed like a fun guy. Students definitely loved him. Follow up on the personality, stability, self-help. His personality changes with age, but there's still rank stability. Changes because of biological reasons like drugs, not out of sheer will. How do we know it doesn't change out of sheer will? It's almost always just measured with self-reported questions. So if you change the kind of person you were, then you were honest, you would change the answers that you gave. So, and again, like biological reasons. So standard story, like if I do something different, if I decide to start, like to give heavy metal a chance, and then I start liking heavy metal, I get in the habit of listening to heavy metal music. Did my biology change? Yeah, it has to. So there's no dichotomy between things where it's about biology and things where it's mental. Every mental thing has some biological root, right? So you can't go and resolve the causation by saying it's biological, not mental. It's like, well, the two things are connected. So, so I'd say, and the key thing is then why not just focus? Well, why focus on mental rather than biology? Because I am a mental thing. I am a mental thing. I have intimate, in fact, infallible knowledge of many mental features of myself, whereas my knowledge of biology is really shaky. If you tell me go and try to get your cholesterol down, or like I don't know, like get your dopamine up, like I don't even know what dopamine is. I couldn't tell you what dopamine was. I'd have to look in a book. I don't have any way of seeing dopamine, especially I don't have any way of seeing my own dopamine, but I do know that I have emotions and beliefs, and can choose my actions. And then if someone comes along and says, "Okay, well, by spending less time on TikTok, you've reduced your dopamine level," it's like, okay, it's very helpful to give a name to an invisible process. It's not helpful at all. It's much more helpful to say, put down the TikTok and do something more constructive now. Let's see. And then is there any data that sheer force of will has changed people's personality? There's a question of what would count. So if a person, so like if I start spending, if I say, okay, I'm going to go and start spending a lot more time with kids so that I come to appreciate them more, right? Does that count? And then there's questions on the personality test about how much do you like children and care about them? And my answers go up. Did I just change my personality through force of will? I think I did. Is the Ivy League worth the premium? No. There are many schools that are almost as highly ranked that cost so much less. The only real reason to pay for them is if you have some super ambitious goal that is actually realistic. All right, so for example, you want to become a Supreme Court justice, then yes, it's worth paying for the Ivies. If you had basically if you had like a 5% chance of getting it without, and you can double that to 10, all right, then maybe that's worth it. Like if that's super important to you for that 5 percentage point boost. Most people at Ivies end up in jobs that are not better than people who go to the public Ivies or top public schools, right? And then in terms of mate value, that would probably be the best one is, well, if you go to Ivy, that puts you in the more elite dating pool. But I'd say, look, public, going to Berkeley or Michigan or Wisconsin, I think you can still marry people in the Ivy League. And in terms of like how much is it raising your probability of getting someone who is super successful, again, I'd say it's pretty marginal. So I'd say like the only real reason to do it is if there is some superlative thing that you are, first of all, really motivated to do, and second of all, you have a realistic chance of doing. Because multiplying a typical person's chance of being Supreme Court justice tenfold is nothing, because it's like 1 in a trillion, and then it's now 1 in 100 billion. Great. Okay. No offense, but do you support open borders for Israel? No, because so normally when people ask me this, I think they're in bad faith and they're just trying to say, "Oh, you do, you do." Or like, I'm not actually Jewish. I'm half Jewish. Never had any Jewish religious education. I don't support Israel. I'm just, like I don't support any government. All governments do terrible things. But I would still say so. Open borders for Israel is a bad idea because it would cause a civil war with very high likelihood. That's why. Right? So it's not because I think that any particular religion should be entitled to their own state or there's some special exemption. So I think that it would be great for Israel to take immigrants from from basically any non-Muslim country, from any country of Muslims where they are relaxed about it. So yeah, like should Israel have open borders with UAE? Yeah, that sounds reasonable because people in UAE understand the slogans of the country: tolerance and moderation, or else. Um, but the main thing that would happen would be a civil war between Israelis and Palestinians, and it would just be a giant bloodbath that would make the current one look like nothing. So no. And again, like, why am I so convinced it would lead to civil war? Because there were already two that were closely related to this. When there was mass Palestinian immigration to Jordan, there was almost a civil war in Jordan, and then in Lebanon, the Palestinian immigration to Lebanon really did actually turn out being a major factor in civil war in Lebanon. So, like, what is special about this? Basically, it's when you've got a fairly homogeneous group of immigrants who very quickly become a large share of the population, and also are a large share of them want to do something terrible. Put those three things together, and that is a recipe for immigration being bad, actually. Doesn't happen often, but you should just be honest about it. All right, so our time is up. Thanks so much for taking time out of your morning to talk about the book. If you haven't bought the book, I think you totally should. I'm really pleased with it. False modesty aside, when I was doing the final read, I'm like, yeah, like, oh, yeah, I'm a good economist, actually. So this is really me doing bread and butter economics in a way that I haven't done in many of the other books. So I'm very proud of it and hope that you like it and recommend it to all your friends. So thanks, everybody, and see y'all later. Bye-bye.